Hello, everyone. Welcome to an all new episode of our show on the Indic Explorer channel. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Now, this being a cultural podcast, a very important part of our culture, especially in terms of being aware of cultural literacy and be educated about our culture, is how do you one is the part is history and reading about it, and the other part is basically experiential, which you go through via travel. When you go to historical places and you look at these sites, there's a different kind of learning and synthesis that happens around culture. And India has had a vast tradition of travel, part of which many people know, but there are many other less known facets of the traditional methods of travel that people don't know. So, to demystify all these topics with regards to historical and heritage tourism, I have with me a very special guest, Anuradha Goyal ji. Thank you so much for joining us.
Namaste, Vineet, and thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast.
So, to set the tone for the conversation, what I wanted to know was, and most youngsters would think about it, travel seems like a very modern experience, right? So, what was it like uh, for our ancestors in terms of when they decided to travel? Mostly the thing that we hear about is the sacred travel, Teertha. So, what was it like in the past versus now? And were there any other methods of travel, especially casual travel?
Okay, great. So, travel is as old as human civilization. Humans have been traveling since time immemorial. The first travels happened when we were hunter-gatherers and we used to travel in search of food, basic food. And then, civilizations happened on the banks of many rivers across the world and in India, on the banks of Saraswati, Sindhu, Ganga, Yamuna, all the rivers. So those were the first travels. And then whatever we have received from the excavations at these sites of Indus Valley civilization, we figure out that our ancestors were doing trade with all the contemporary civilizations of the time across the world. So which means they were also traveling. So trade involves exchange of material. So I have something in excess and I give it to you. You have something in excess and we exchange that for a value. So that exchange was happening. We were exporting precious stones. We were exporting cotton and a whole lot of things. We found ports around our coasts. So people were traveling since the time immemorial, but most of the travel was for trade, for exchanging goods and maybe services, but primarily goods. Then a lot of travel used to happen for knowledge. If you look at the educational map of India, of ancient India, you will see that we have universities in Takshashila, a lot of them in present-day Bihar, Nalanda, Udanpuri, Vikramshila. Then in the central India, then in southern India, in Kanchipuram, you find Ghatikas where education used to happen. So people were traveling for education, pretty much like today, how we travel for education. We go to the best university for the subject we want to study and we travel globally. So people were traveling for that. Then, of course, there was Teertha, which was an inbuilt part of our culture. So there were Teertha which were done annually. There were Teertha which were done once in 12 years. There were Teertha which were done once in a lifetime, or maybe once in a while by somebody who's fortunate enough to have enough resources and enough willpower to do those, because doing Teertha was not as simple as it is today. So Teertha used to be a big part of travel. Then, of course, armies used to travel a lot for war. So they used to travel. So if you actually see, most of the travelogues that we have received are by the people or the historians who accompanied the kings. So Megasthenes he came with Alexander and he wrote about India. Similarly, lot of other historians came with their invaders. A lot of recent historical records by British writers who came and saw and wrote about it. So that was it. And even today, the people who work in the armed forces, they keep traveling for wars. It could be internal wars, external wars, or calamities or disasters that they have to handle. So these are 3 or 4 types of travels, and we see a lot of similarity between why ancients used to travel and why we travel. The mode of travel may have changed, the ease of travel may have changed, but the reasons pretty much remain the same. Now comes the perception of travel, which is the leisure travel. Today when we talk about travel and we see travel pictures of people, especially on social media, on Facebook and Instagram, everybody we know is posting their pictures of travels. The leisure travel part was not as much a part of travel. So even a couple of generations ago, if you speak to your grandparents, they will tell you leisure travel was primarily to family and friends. So you went to your nanny's house, your daddy's house, your chacha's house, your mausi's house for travel. And if they lived in a certain area, then you explored that area with them. So that was kind of restricted. Leisure travel, as we know today, is as a phenomena, it's a recent phenomena. And that has been fueled by the presence of a lot of travel infrastructure, which is the hotels, the transportation options, affordability of those options, as well as the plenty of options that are available. So to that extent, it's recent. Leisure travel used to be there in the past. So there are examples of people going on pleasure trips on the waterways, or people going on pleasure trips into forests. So we get examples of people going for Van Bhojan, so eating in the jungles. So we get examples of that. But these elaborate digital nomad kind of life, we get very few examples. We do get, but as a percentage of the population, they were very, very few and far in between.
So I'm actually very curious to know, because for a large part of its history, there were many kingdoms across the geography of India, right? So how, and many of the times they were at war with each other, or they were troubled, diplomatic relations. So
Right.
how did that affect travel, and how easy or difficult was it for a traveler to go from one kingdom to the other, and what was the king's attitude to such travelers?
So kings were great enablers of travels, So they were the ones who managed and sustained the travel infrastructure. They used to build guest houses. They used to build wells and step wells on the trade routes, or on the roadways system. They used to ensure there are fruit-bearing trees on the paths. They used to ensure there is food for travelers available. So they were great enablers of travelers. So travel, like I said, the primary purpose of travel used to be business. So, and every king needed business to flourish. So they would never stop that, irrespective of their wars going on. And second, there used to be a cultural India, which was always bound together. So, for example, if there is a Kumbh Mela, which is happening in, let's say, Prayag, so people from all over India would converge to that. And those will be exceptional times when everybody would be allowed there. And actually for Teertha Yatras, if I read the accounts of travelers, and if I read the Teerthas mentioned in our scriptures, they very clearly says there were no rules for pilgrims. Pilgrims could actually, Teerth Yatris could go anywhere within the, in the boundary of Bharatvarsha, or maybe outside also, because the boundaries are always fluid. So there were no rules for such, but at the same time, there was another aspect as well. Lot of Teerth Yatris or Sadhu Sants, because Sadhu community used to be the wandering community, they were also used as spies by the kings. So in the Kumbh Melas, in fact, one of the places they say that, where should your spies be? Where should your spy network be? Or where should your feedback mechanism be? So if a king needed a feedback on how he is doing and how his let's say any new schemes he's launched or any new thing he's done, where does he get feedback from? They would have their people spread out in these places where people gather, in all the melas and fairs, and they would try to get feedback. They will try to do all kind of spy activities there. So that part was also there. But as a Teertha, you were free to go anywhere.
Okay, that's interesting, especially the spy part of it, right? I wanted to ask you about Dharamshalas. How did they function, and was it financed only by kings or by merchant guilds as well? And what was it like in a Dharamshala?
Okay. So let's look at the word Dharamshala. Where do you hear a parallel word? Pathshala. So what do you do in a Pathshala? You go there for Pathan. So Dharamshala was primarily driven by Dharma. So whose Dharma? So for example, if I have a lot of money, one of the Punya Dharmas that I can do is build Dharamshalas at Teerthalas so that anybody can come and stay there. So from my perspective, it's my dharmic activity. Now, practically how it functioned, and I'll tell you from my own family example. So, for example, my ancestors built a Dharamshala in Nainadevi. So, what was our right there is that when we visit, we can use it. We have the right to first use it when we visit it there. But rest of the year, which is like 360 days in a year, it could be used by anybody who wants to be there. But what's the dharma of a pilgrim? So let's say if now I am using a Dharamshala which has been built by somebody else, then what is my dharma? My dharma is that if I can afford it, I pay for it voluntarily. So I would pay for it because there is a cost attached to the upkeep of the Dharamshala. Now, Dharamshalas were only a place to stay, probably with a well, so that you have access to water. There was no food option there. Most people, till about 30-40 years back also, families, when they traveled to Teerthalas, they carried their provisions, they carried all their food arrangements, and they used to cook themselves. Eating out is it's a very, very recent phenomenon in India. Most people don't want to eat out. Most pilgrims don't want to eat out. They used to cook their own food wherever you go. In fact, till about 4-5 years back, when I was studying Haridwar and I visited some dharamshalas there were pilgrims from all over India staying there for some time, which you could say something like an extended stay, 3 weeks to 3 months kind of stay. And they were all cooking themselves. So they would do their pilgrimage. They would go to the temples they want to visit. They will do their anushtans. They will do their tap, jap, dan, snan, everything. But they would cook themselves. So that's how they function. A dharma followed from both sides. So if I have access and I want to contribute to the society, I build a dharamshala in a place where a lot of people come and need temporary accommodation. But as a traveler, if I can afford it, I would try to pay for it. There was no ticketed shelf price for it like
but
we have it today.
But it wouldn't get misused in the sense that people will come just use the service, and because anyways they are financed by kings as well, right? Largely. So the possibility.
Dharamshalas were financed by a lot of trading community. A lot of businessmen would fund it.
But it would.
And there were also community dharamshalas. You also remember that if you go to Kashi, you will find a dharamshala associated with every community. So let's say you come from a certain community, then you will have your own dharamshala and you will go and stay there. And sometimes they restrict it to their own community as well. So in which case it becomes more like a community thing. So it becomes a community center or for a particular community, in which case the misuse is very limited. Now, you have to understand that today when we look at these options, they look like a freeloader option, or they look like a couch surfing option that you can do it. But in good old days, when people did Yatra, they did it with lot of niyam that they used to follow for Yatra. And the first niyam was that you will observe brahmacharya. There was a vrat that people took, and the The final goal of Teertha is to purify yourself. So you will not engage in deeds like this. It was the basic tenet behind Teertha. Now, there will be a certain small percentage which will end up misusing it, but that's something that you can't really avoid.
So this is a very important point, especially because people, a lot of people look at India as a civilizational state, and one of the most important factors that is said to contribute to this identity of civilizational consciousness is the idea of the sacred geography. So, is there any occurrences of this in the text? Is there a consciousness amongst the people back in the day of this larger civilizational identity through the sacred, trails?
So, the use of sacred geography is very recent, but India is bound together through its travels. Like you rightly said, that we were divided by politics. There were different kings, and the kingdoms, the size of the kingdoms kept changing as the wars happened. All kinds of activity happened. But what remained unchanged were these travel traditions. So, for example, let's say, and we were very aware of each other. For example, let's say Adi Shankaracharya. He was born in a small village on the banks of Puna River in Kerala. And he travels all the way to Omkareshwar on the banks of Narmada River, right in the heart of India, to study to his guru. Right? So, which means in Kerala, he was aware of a guru who lived in Omkareshwar. And then he travels across India, so which means the awareness of all these Teerthas were always there. So even today, if you ask anywhere in India, you travel, and people would know as much about Rameshwaram as they know about Kashi, as they know about Dwarka, as they know about Badrinath, Kedarnath, or Jagannath Puri, or Kamakhya. Right? So, and these were like dream travel maps that everybody had. So they all wanted to go to these places, and it was also driven by who you. So, for example, if you are a Krishna Bhakt, if you follow Krishna is your Ishta Devata, then it will be in your travel trail that you want to visit Mathura, you want to visit Dwarka, you want to visit Kurukshetra. Right? Similarly, if you are a follower of Ram, you want to visit Ayodhya. If you are a Shiva Bhakt, you want to visit Kashi, Mahakal, and 12 Jyotirlings. If you are a Shakta, you want to visit all the 108 or 51 Shakti peaks. So, your personal desired map was individual, but the geography was always spread out across India. And the best example is Chardham. Now, imagine if there was no air travel or even train travel, and you have to go to all the 4 dhams of India. You will travel by road or maybe waterways, because waterways used to exist till even Mughal times. So you would traverse the whole of country if you visited Chardham, no matter where your native place is. So these were enablers of many, many things. Now Teertha, and in today's time we tend to look at one vertical as one vertical. But what happens when you travel? You don't really see only temples. You also see trade. You also see flora, fauna. You see culture. You see what changes. You discover new ideas. It's a great source of innovation. You will come back once you come back from such a explorative travel. You will come back with lots of ideas, some of which you may inculcate in your life, in your business, in your culture. A lot of that exchange happens. So these were also opportunities for a lot of exchange.
Interesting points you mentioned there. And on a further note on this, were there any unifying strands across temples in India? And I know that you visited a lot of temples and you grouped them into 4-5 categories because you could see a lot of similarities in them. So what were these?
So there were royal temples, which are the biggest, grandest, and the most beautiful temples we see, mostly in stone, or the ones which have survived are in stone. And these are the markers of the time they were built in. So if Cholas built them in 10th, 11th century, it tells us the grandeur of the times of Cholas in 11th century. It tells us that how advanced they were from a technology perspective, from an engineering perspective, from culture perspective, from spirituality perspective, all of that. So these are all royal temples. Now, royal temples, were they accessible to everybody? I'm not too sure. My sense is that royal temples were built for royal families, but they would be opened up for public for utsavs, for special days, for, let's say if it's a Shiva temple, it will be open to everybody for Shivratri. Similarly, for other important events where there's a public participation, they'll be open to it. So they are important from a very historical perspective because they tell us a lot, and there's a lot of things which they have carved on stone, whether it is whether it's flora, fauna, culture, dressing, jewelry, hairstyles, stories, traders. So, in a 7th, 8th century temple in Kanchipuram, you find, Arabs and Chinese in, let's say, Konark. So, they were trading with these. So, they are also a kind of documentation. So, this is one category of temple, most of which today stand as monuments. They are hardly temples, they're mostly monuments. Then there were Teertha, which were the spiritual core of India. And these are traditionally the 12 Jyotirlingas, 51 Shakti Peeths, Vaishnav Sthals, Ganpatya Sthals, Sun Temples, all of that. And these were the places, and here temples were not as important. What was important was the water body there. So it could be river. So if you go to Mathura, even today, when you go to Mathura and you ask them which is the most important temple, they will say Yamuna, Braj Ki Raj, and Govardhan Parvat. These are the three most important things because they remain unchanged. Temples come and go. Similarly, in Kashi or Prayag, it is the river which is the most important thing. So in these places, the geography itself is important. It could be a mountain, it could be a forest, but most of the times it is a river or a lake or a water body, or usually a lake or a water body. So these are the places which were meant for everybody, and even today, to the best of my knowledge, there is no restriction of any kind on any of these Teertha. Anybody who has a Shraddha or who wants to visit these places can visit these places. Then comes the third one, an important category which has been misinterpreted a lot. That is the Kuladevta temples. Now, these Kuladevta temples belong to a Kul. Kul means a lineage of families. So, a group of families that originated, let's say, from a certain person worships a particular deity and they built that temple for that deity. So today we assume that every temple is a public monument and anybody and everybody should be allowed there. That's why a lot of these temple controversies happen. But the fact remains that there were a lot of Kula temples where that Kula or that family had the first right, and it was up to them to allow others or not. Even today, you'll find a lot of temples. For example, GSB temples in Goa. They don't allow non-GSBs or non-Yajmans, as they call it, beyond the point within the temple. And which is perfectly fine. And these temples have their own rules. Who can go, who cannot go, when can people go, up to what point can they go. But that is also because they belong to a family. They are not public property. So they are as good as a temple in your home or my home. So if I have to visit temple in your home, I need your permission to visit it. It's only when you permit me I can visit your temple. Similarly, Kul Devata temples belong to Kulas. So that is something that not many people understand, and I hope they understand so that we start respecting the boundaries which do exist in a
Correct.
society.
And a very important part of the temple experience is the prasada that we collect at the end of our at the end of the devotional service. So, and as you've been around many temples, what are some of your favorite mandir prasads that are offered in terms of how it is made and the taste and all of that?
Yeah. So you typically get prasad at Vishnu
Achha.
temples. So you will not get edible prasad at Shiva temples because
And
it's not
Shakti
even offered
temples?
there. So you get them most Shakti temples at times you get.
Okay.
At times,
Okay.
but not necessarily. But Vishnu temples you
Why
get.
is that?
And
Why is
Hanuman
that
temple,
specific?
that's the
Okay.
nature of the Devata. Vishnu is that's the nature of Devta. That's a whole different discussion at all. You get prasad at Hanuman temples, Ganesha temples. Not so much at Ganesha temples, but Vishnu temples are the ones where you get elaborate prasads. So the most elaborate prasad is of course at Jagannath Puri, which is the world's biggest kitchen, and they still follow all the rules that are associated with cooking the prasad there. And every morning there are a lot of Brahmins who cook food on a wood fire, and then that is offered to Jagannath. It becomes prasad. Then it is offered to Mahalakshmi. It becomes Mahaprasad, and that is what is consumed by thousands and thousands of people every day. So that's the biggest Annakshetra. It's called the Annakshetra of Jagannath. So it is the Annakshetra. Then, of course, we have Tirupati Laddu, which is patented Tirupati Laddu, and it's divine in taste. You just cannot have one. So that is one. I personally like the bundi prasad that you get at Hanuman temples on Tuesdays in North India mostly. So if you've lived in North India, then every Tuesday outside every Hanuman temple, there are these bundi, mounds of bundi that you can see bright here, orange colored bundi, very, very inviting. So these are some of the prasad. Nathadwara, you get very, very interesting prasad. Through the day, different prasads are offered. So that is there. One of my other favorite prasads is Makhan Mishri Prasad. Now, you get it at a lot of Krishna temples, but the ones I have experienced and I have loved is you get it early morning only. Makhan Mishri Prasad, you get only in the morning because that's the time to eat it. So, you get it in Dwarkadhish temple in Dwarka, and you get it in Banke Bihari temple in Mathura. I'm sure there are other temples where you get it. So, these are some of my prasad favorite prasads. I have a post on temple prasads from around India. So check it out.
The
sometime.
other interesting thing that I like about temple prasads, especially in Puri, Tirupati, all across India, is that they still preserve the older cooking traditions, which means that the ingredients they use are not the modern ingredients. For example, we take for granted something like chili, potato, these things which have actually come from outside. And chili,
So let me just correct you there. Chili is not from outside. So it is attributed to Portuguese, I know. But they brought in one particular variety of chili. So we did have chili before that. Remember we used chili for nazar utarna. So we did have chili, but a particular variety came with them. That is true.
my understanding is that most of these cuisines use pepper, because pepper was abundantly available in India, and temple prasadas still use pepper and not chili in almost all cases, or in majority of the cases, where they still preserve the older cooking traditions, which I find quite interesting.
So I would say they tend to use all the local ingredients. So they use only seasonal vegetables. They use only vegetables which are grown. So in good old days, there would be a temple vegetable garden where they would grow all this. Today, I assume they source it from outside, and because I've not seen vegetable gardens around. So temples always had two or three things associated with them. They had a water body associated with them. So temple tank or a lake or a well at least. And they would have a sacred grove associated with it, where they'll have all the trees associated with the deity planted there. And whatever you need, even the flowers, flowers which are offered to the deity would typically come from the surroundings of the temple. This mass trade of flowers is again a recent phenomenon. In fact, when I was reading Devi Bhagavad Puran, it actually said that if you want to offer flowers to the deity, you should grow themselves. Otherwise, the punya goes to the person who's grown them.
Oh, that's quite interesting. I didn't know that. I always used to think that the ecosystem around the temple, like the florists, etc., were always there. That's quite a new thing that I got to know today.
So they used to be there in Teertha because in Teertha you cannot go and grow, and there were a lot of visitors who would come. And that's why Teertha were always closer to lot of forests, and lot of greenery used to be there. If you read the original Mahatmas of places like Ayodhya or Kashi. But ideally it says, in fact, Skanda Puran has a beautiful, it has a Kartik Mas Mahatmya, where it gives a absolute mathematical calculation of Pap and Punya. So everything that you do or earns you Pap or Punya. It's like an account book that keeps running. So you don't earn just by doing what you're doing or not doing what you're not doing. You also earn by being part of the ecosystem. So it says, let's say you earn a punya. So it doesn't remain 100% with you. You'll share it 50% with your spouse, 10% with your parents or your children. And there is even a small percentage associated with your neighbors. So if you do good or bad, pap or punya, everybody in your ecosystem gets a part of it because they play a role in that. So if you're doing something wrong and I don't stop you from doing that, I also earn that part of the papa that you earn. Or if I assist you in doing a punya, I also get a part of it. So similarly, if you grow a flower yourself and offer it to the deity, you get the pap. But if I look at it from a practical perspective, this was a way to ensure biodiversity all around you.
Okay.
This was a way to ensure that you will grow those plants. You will grow those flowers. You will offer one to the deity, but you will get to see a whole lot of flowers.
Yeah, that's true. And are there, what are some very unusual temples, off the beaten trail that people don't know about, and what makes them special?
So there are lots of temples. I have a full book on unusual temples of India. So I'm sure you've heard of Rat Temple
Rajasthan.
In Bikaner. In Rajasthan. It's a place called Deshnok, close to Bikaner. Now it's actually a Kuladevata temple. So it's not a Teertha, it's not a royal temple. It's a Kuladevata temple of the Charan community. So this temple has lots of rats, about 20,000 rats. A few of them are white, most of them are usual brown colored rats, and they just stay there. You can visit the temple actually belongs to them. Everybody else can just visit, and it's there is a whole story of how the rats came to be there. There was so this temple, Karani Mata, is a woman who lived 700-800 years ago. She's a real woman who lived in that area 700 years ago or around that time. And she did some miraculous things, which today looks like a miracle, but some very brave acts because of which her community was saved. Her community could have been lost, but because of her brave act, the community was saved. Because she's saved, people started treating her as Devi. She's supposed to be the incarnation of Hinglaj Mata, whose temple, which is a Shakti Peeth, which is now in Pakistan. And it says that her descendants became these rats.
Oh,
Yeah. So it's her descendants became these rats, so they have the first right on that temple, and of course the humans of Charan community. So the temple belongs to them. It's a very miraculous thing to go and see that. People keep talking about living in harmony with this, that, but these are living examples of how we can live in harmony with a creature like rat.
yes.
And they are also living in harmony with us. It's a mutual harmonious relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing that I really like about Hindu Dharma is that it actually says that the universe is like we are all parts of it. It's not just human beings. In a way, animals
Yes.
and plants and the flora and fauna, all of these are part of the ecosystem. So,
So we very clearly say that we are one of the 84 lakh yonis. So I am one in 84 lakh. I am not the center of the
yeah,
universe.
that's a very different way of looking at it, right? So coming to the quest, because we are talking about heritage and historical tourism, what is the status of heritage tourism in India today? What is your take on this?
So there are two ways to look at it. One is to look at how it is today. So it's a part of general tourism. So people do go to visit monuments. They do go to forts and palaces and temples and everything. But second is to look at the potential. What is the potential and where we are. So the untapped potential is huge, huge. Both for our domestic tourism as well as global tourism. So, for example, when I visited some of the so-called wonders of the world, I felt, why are we not positioning something like Kailashnath Temple at Ellora and explaining to people that besides being a temple, it's world's biggest engineering marvel. It has been carved top down. It is standing for almost 2000 years. It is, to cut a rock of a solid block of rock of a giant size upside down without making a single mistake. And it's a wonder. Can there be a bigger wonder than this? I am not aware of any bigger man-made wonder. But how many of us have visited it? And those of us who have visited, how many of us understand the importance of this, and how many of us take inspiration from it to design our new age buildings? What are we building today? My biggest regret is that what we are building today has no relevance to or has no inspiration from these absolutely wonderful engineering and architectural marvels.
Yeah, and the other thing is take inspiration from it and then try to build something that is new and modern, like kind of grow upon it, incrementally. So neither do we have a good
Yes.
connect with the past, and neither is our contemporary architecture of any modern value as well, to be
Yeah.
very honest.
So I would say aesthetics, we can stick to our aesthetics. And yes, go modern, but if modern has an advantage. So, for example, I live in Bangalore. Now, Bangalore has year round, it has a pleasant weather. And what are we building? We are building glass and steel buildings which need an air conditioner 24/7. Now, and if you tell me it's modern, I really question your understanding of modernity. We have to adapt architecture to our weather conditions, to our needs, and to longevity and aesthetics. Even 100 years ago or 200 years ago, when they were building these havelis, or vadas as they call them, you go there and you'll see if there is a water pipe. and there's a rainwater pipe which is coming and leaving water, let's say in the garden. They would carve it so beautifully that it will not be an eyesore.
Mm.
It will look beautiful. It will merge with the rest of it. Unless you see the water falling, you will not realize it's used for that. You go and look at the Mandu's palaces and forts, and the water management system will leave you in complete awe. And you'll actually say, "Am I the descendants of the same people?"
Yeah, I mean, it just blends in, and to use something which is utilitarian and make it beautiful is it's quite an art. I mean,
Yes, yes.
and the other thing is about historical travel is visiting museums, and I personally really like visiting museums. And you have written a very interesting piece on how the basic guidelines of what one should follow while visiting a museum. That will be a good starting point, I think, for a lot of youngsters watching this show to do some prep before they go to a museum. So, can you just throw some light on this?
Yeah. So museums are like a piece of the past which is still available to you. Unfortunately, in India, museums are not very well curated, presented, or made accessible to people. While we have a wealth of artifacts lying in our museums. If you go to something like National Museum in Delhi, yeah, if you visit, let's say, miniature gallery of it, you can spend a lifetime studying them. While the governments and the museum curators, work towards making them accessible, I would say go to the museums and spend some time with the artifacts there. Try to understand them from a different perspective. Try to go to the times when that artifact was built. Try to go into the mind of the person who built it or the person who commissioned it. And that will give you a lot of answers. For example, I have been looking at, these bullock carts. You have these clay models of bullock carts that we have found in Harappan civilization or Indus Valley civilization, and they've been found across small little toy bullock carts. And I always wondered, why would they make, it could be the obvious answer that everybody gave me was, they are toys. So they said they were bigger bullock carts and they made the toy version for kids. So kids used to probably play. Very recently, I discovered that somewhere in central India, they actually have a bullock cart festival where everybody drives a bullock cart. And the kids would drive a small, a toy version of it. And it's a competition. It's kind of a competition. It's kind of a celebration. So I'm yet to study it, but all these artifacts have an unbroken tradition of them being used in some form and shape. So go and spend time there. Most of the times you will not find too much of information because our museums are not so well documented. But try and speak to the staff. They always have some knowledgeable people on board, and if they oblige you, use their services. Every government museum has a library, has a bookshop where they have books which which document the artifacts. Again, not a great documentation, but you get something about it. So try and spend that time. And if you're going to a bigger museum, like say the museum at Bhopal or even National Museum in Delhi or Indian Museum in Kolkata or Chhatrapati Shivaji Museum in Bombay or Egmont Museum in Chennai, you can't cover them in one day. So choose one or two galleries that you want to spend time with and spend good amount of time there. And if you want to see other galleries, go another time. Be in that frame of mind and understand them. So it's very difficult to understand sculptures and decorative art and numismatics and say miniature art in one day. It becomes too much of an information unless you are a scholar of those
But one
subjects.
very interesting thing that you mentioned in that write up was how visiting a museum is a very individualistic experience. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So, going to museum is like reading a book. Everybody reads the book differently. Same book, 100 people can read, and 100 people will pick up a different thing out of that book. The same is true for museums. Every time, every person who visits will be intrigued by a different artifact, will be intrigued by a different historical period. For example, I am very fond of ancient art, and I'm not at all fond of weapons. I usually skip the weapons gallery. But if you are somebody who's interested in wars, then weapons gallery becomes most important to you. So choose. So if you go with a group of people who have different interests, you will not be able to focus on any one thing, and also go with your knowledge. So like reading a book, you meet the author at an intersection of your experience and author's experience. Similarly, when you visit the museum, you meet the artifact at an intersection of your experience, how you have seen. So, let's say if I am somebody who admires miniature art, then I would go into the depth of miniature art in a museum, while somebody who's not interested may just say, oh, nice, okay, well, it's nice to look at this, but I'm not interested in each and every color and each and every of shape of a leaf, or what flower is painted and how it is painted, or how the nose is painted and how the eyes are painted. While for somebody who's interested in that, all that becomes a piece of information. So I think going alone is far more enriching than going in a group, unless that group is very cohesive.
Okay. And you mentioned, like, even if they go in a group, they should split up and, probably meet back at a place after the end of the day, or
So that's more, yeah. So that's more like you want to go in a group, but you still want to come back with a very rich experience. So that's one way
yeah.
to do it. So you don't have to be alone for your meals or for your chai and coffee, but for your experience,
That's a
you still go
very
alone.
interesting point, and I think a lot of people should take this advice. Uh, the other thing is about the culture, like, because we were talking about individual experience. What do you think as a traveler? What do you think about the culture of solo travel in India? Like in comparison to especially countries in the Western world, which have a very good network of hostels and all of that. And it's very normal actually over there to travel alone. And traveling alone has its different benefits, right? What do you think about solo travel as a culture in India? And also, do you have any tips as such specifically for women travelers, whether solo or in group? Because you would have faced these challenges when you have been traveling around the country. So I would want to.
Right. So in India, solo travel is actually recommended. So when you read the scriptures about pilgrimage, especially, solo travel is recommended. It's recommended that you travel alone, or you at max you travel with your spouse. Most of the time, they recommend solo travel so that you can focus on your sadhana. Okay? So solo travel is not new to India at all. Now, the way solo travel is projected today, I would say it's a function of two things. One, age. In a certain age group, people like to travel alone, which is essentially 20s and 30s, early 30s maybe. There is, in a younger age group, people like to travel alone. Second, it is a function of you not finding the right company. So I have done a lot of solo travel, not because I wanted to travel solo, or I wanted to be a placard holder of solo traveling, but because when I had the time, when my dates were there, or when in a certain budget I wanted to travel, or in a certain way I wanted to travel, I never found that match with people who would travel with me. So the choice is between not traveling and traveling solo, and most people choose traveling solo. So, and today, honestly, I don't think we ever travel solo. As long as your mobile phone is working, you're not truly solo because you're connected back with everybody you know. You are connected with the local community. There are million ways to connect with locals or with communities around the world. So you're not really solo. You're not disconnected from the world. You may be traveling alone. You may be taking the flight alone, but then there are 180 other passengers on the same flight. So it's not really a solo thing the way it used to be before the mobile phone era.
Nice.
So coming to the safety question. So I, and I'm repeating this for the 100th time probably, that if you really look at the safety statistics around the world and in India, you will see that most crime against women happen within the known circles of family and friends or colleagues. Most crimes, 95% plus. So if I reverse these statistics, I can say that you're far more safer amongst strangers than you are in your own circle.
That's a very interesting twist. It's a very interesting point.
Okay. Second, but I have traveled so much solo and so much in deep inside India. Let me tell you, if you are respectful, and when I say respectful, I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the word, and I am saying it as a tool. For me, respect is my biggest tool. The moment you are respectful and genuinely respectful, most people are respectful towards you. If you really analyze I'm not talking about few stray incidents that happen, that always happen, that can happen to you within your own city as well. But most of the times, if you are respectful to people, you get it back many-fold. You get it back many-fold. I have had incidents when I have just walked up to a policeman with folded hands and say, "Sir, मैं यहाँ फंस गई हूँ. Can you help me?" They've gone out of the way to help me. I've seen hoteliers come to my rescue and go out of the way to help me. But you have to have respect and gratitude. That's the only thing that people need. A lot of times, people, especially urban people, when they go to little hinterlands, they tend to go with a chip on their shoulder, which comes back to them. And here, let me tell you, I'm not talking about those petty crimes, that somebody charging you 10 times for a 500-meter ride in an auto, or your purse being stolen, or your something. I'm not talking about those petty crimes because they happen. Travelers are more vulnerable to that, and in a tourist place they tend to happen far more. But I don't count that as a safety risk. Safety risk is somewhere somebody can attack me, somebody can violate me. Those are the safety risks I'm talking about.
Right. The other thing is that when people visit historical or heritage places, a very important thing is how well the information is disseminated to them, either through tourist manuals, books, and the other important thing is guided tours. So, what are some of the best places in India which have the best guided tours?
Okay, so see, today information is not a problem. Today, as long as you have an internet connection, Google will give you almost every information. There are bloggers and vloggers like me who literally take you to that place and give you everything. So information is not a problem at all. And if you are smart enough, you can use that information to plan your trips very well. Guided tours are good for people who do not want to do their own planning, and they just want to outsource that part to it. I think most popular tourist circuits have a good guided tour network, the most popular being the Golden Triangle, Jaipur, Agra, Delhi, which is the most visited and the most popular. It's like India 101 kind of tour. Everybody goes there. Rajasthan has great circuits which come under guided tours. Then, of course, Ajanta, Ellora, most UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Khajuraho has a lot of it. Kashi has a lot of it. And then it, of course, depends on the interest. For example, Buddhist sites get a lot of guided tours from all the Buddhist countries. So if you go to Bodh Gaya or Saranath, you will see a whole lot of Buddhist tourists from the Buddhist countries coming and doing the whole circuit of Buddha's life. They'll start from his birthplace in Lumbini, go to all the places associated with him and all that. Similarly, you have Jain Teerthas where mostly Jainis would organize their trips. So it depends on the interest.
Right.
There's no dearth of guided tours.
Lastly, I think there is a lot of untapped potential, like you mentioned about heritage tourism. How do you think it can be tweaked or changed, this whole way in which heritage tourism is packaged? If it can be more experiential, experimental, and get more youth to pull in to these places, because right now I think there is a paucity of, like, there is a small bunch of youngsters who are into this, but largely there's a paucity of youngsters going to these places, and this is a very important thing, because I mean, that's a way of keeping our knowledge about our culture and history, right? And the next generation has to know about it. So how do you think it can become a more fun-filled experiences, integrating trekking, etc. activities with the cultural knowledge as well? Do you think something can be done?
So a lot of youngsters need to come up with startups in this space. There's a lot of scope for innovative, experiential, experimental startups in this space, because this space is driven by two things: booking of hotels, booking of flights. That's where it begins and ends. So most people are travel agents, and what they will do, they will make an itinerary for you, they will book your tickets, they will book your hotels, and that's it. Uske baad, you are on your own. At max, there will be some guided tours, so some ill-informed guide will come and give you some gyan, which you may or may not digest. So there is a lot of scope for knowledge-driven tours. There's a lot of scope for knowledge-driven tours. The market will have to be built. For any new product, you have to build a market, because the product doesn't exist. There is no market today. If you go and ask people, do you need a knowledge-driven tour? They will say, well, what is that? I don't know. So you have to create a market there. Once you create a market, there is a huge untapped potential. So why just history heritage? History heritage is, of course, there. I'm saying even business travel, industrial travel. Why not go to, let's say, a weaving center and understand how weaving happens? Or why not go to a ceramics center and understand how ceramics happen? It can be a history, heritage, culture, crafts, business, and an industrial tour all packaged in one. And we have to stop looking at actually everything, but travel specifically as this one thing. I will see only one thing. It doesn't happen. When you go to a place, you see that place in totality. You go to Madurai for Meenakshi temple, but you also try Bigar Bhanga there. And you also try, dosa there. You also go to the flower market there. You also visit Jain Teerthas there. So a destination is a combination of many, many, many things. This highlighting one and, subjugating everything else is a very, very, I don't know if I'm right in using the word, but very Western way of looking. For everything, there's one pill. You look at the whole self-help books sections, for every problem there is one pill. It doesn't happen that way. We are a network. So go to a destination, you have to see it for everything. For example, in Varanasi, I mean, what do you know Varanasi for? Temples and ghats. But I can tell you there are 7 GI tag products that are made in Kashi. Okay, and there are certain things which are made only in Kashi.
Okay.
So if you see my post on Banaras souvenirs, I have listed all of them. why should you miss out on that? And shopping tourism or retail tourism is also a part of tourism. Souvenirs, we have not really worked on creating great souvenirs. So there is a huge scope for entrepreneurship.
Interesting. I mean, largely what you're saying is that it's a very holistic experience, right? So from the food to the
Yes,
surroundings and all of that. So yeah, all
right.
things considered, that's a very valid point. And with that, we come to the end of our discussion. It's been a fascinating chat with you, Anuradha ji. And we look forward to having you on the podcast in the future as well.
Thank you so much, Vineet, for having me. And let all your listeners be great travelers.
Yes, absolutely. Happy travel, guys. With that, we come to the end of the show. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until next time, signing off.